What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Clayton Phillips for the donation to the channel via the PayPal. Once again, much respect to him for showing love to Too Raw for TV. Alright, so this is something that I actually did a video about a very, very long time ago. It may have been something like 8 or 9 years ago. I remember talking about this, and that is an NBA without Michael Jordan. What if Michael Jordan never played in the NBA? What would have happened? Now, obviously, we don't know what would have happened because there's just too many different variables and scenarios to think about. Number one, you could make the argument that, well, maybe someone like Michael Jordan just took his place. Maybe it would have been fate that someone like Michael Jordan took his place. If Michael Jordan decided to play baseball, maybe somebody named, I don't know, names don't sound as catchy, but what if somebody named Larry Cooper became the greatest player the game has ever seen in Chicago? Maybe a little bit different variation of his game, but still the same 6-0. I mean, we just don't know. Maybe it was just fate that someone was going to take the Bulls to this mystical run in the 90s, right? Or mythical run in the 90s. I don't know. Or you can make the argument that somebody else would have came along. If fate intervened and Jordan decided not to play basketball, at least on to the point where it's professional, maybe someone else who had a unlucky break in our timeline, in this alternate timeline, maybe things go the right way for them. Maybe Len Bias doesn't overdose. Maybe Ralph Sampson doesn't have that terrible knee and back injuries. Maybe Bernard King doesn't tear his knee up, and he plays with Pat Ewing. So there's so many different things. But let's just go with the belief that when Michael Jordan gets cut from his basketball team, when he's at Laney High, or cut from the making the roster, I believe, when he gets cut from junior varsity with Laney High, let's go with the scenario that he gives up on basketball and he changes his focus to baseball, which I believe was his first true love. And let's say with the same competitiveness, the same drive to succeed, he becomes a baseball player. Now, I think it's pretty easy to say that he wasn't as naturally talented a baseball player as he was a basketball player. But with his drive, with his work ethic, let's say that he works himself into being not just a Major League Baseball player, but a Hall of Fame baseball player. Not the GOAT, but he's a Hall of Fame baseball player for none other than the Chicago White Sox during the 80s and 90s with Frank Thomas. So he's in an alternate world, though he always boasts, had I chose to play basketball, I'd have been even better. I could have been the best, and we would have laughed at that, not knowing any better. So let's have this alternate scenario where everything else goes the same way. Everything else goes the same way. Everything. Every little final detail goes the same way, with the exception of Michael Jordan not playing basketball. All right? So, but we do have to figure something out here. Because one thing that has to be determined is If Michael Jordan isn't available for the '84 draft, then who do the Bulls select? My guess. Hmm. Maybe Alvin Robinson. Maybe Alvin Robinson. And Alvin Robinson was a fine player, but not a Michael Jordan. And, maybe the Bulls go to the playoffs a couple of years. Let's say they still get Pippen because everything else goes the same way. But how do things change? Well, there's no rise of the Chicago Bulls. So then you have to ask yourself, who's the team that's going to fill that void? Will it be the Atlanta Hawks? The Cleveland Cavaliers? Because as we know, it was the Bulls that was facing the Pistons in the late 80s. So, in the playoffs and the semifinals and conference finals. So, who replaces them? My thinking is the shot never happens. Cleveland was on that trajectory. So I think it's Cleveland. But I don't think Cleveland becomes the championship team that the Bulls were. So, so Detroit still wins championships in 89 and 90. But in the 91 playoffs, who does Detroit face? And I'm thinking it may be Charles Barkley and the Philadelphia 76ers, who I think Detroit beats. And then maybe Detroit goes to the finals, plays against the Lakers for a third time. I believe it's the third time. And we could see this as Magic Johnson trying to get his revenge for the '89 playoffs when, Magic was hurt. But who wins? I don't know. You would think that Detroit is a little bit deeper, but they're more banged up, and they're not quite the same team. Isaiah's not the same guy. I'm thinking, matchup-wise, Detroit will probably be favored. And I guess you could argue that Detroit wins a third championship in 6 or 7 games. I would venture to say that at this point, Joe Dumars wins a second league MVP, finals MVP. The Pistons go down as one of the great dynasty teams ever. But then after that, I think they sputter out. I think they still sputter out, and that's it. So who wins championships after that? It's just hard to say, man. Maybe in '92 it's Portland. So Clyde gets a championship in '92. In '93, I think Barkley. It's the same scenario. Phoenix, because I'm assuming Cleveland's going to play Portland in '92. I'm assuming everything else goes the same way. It's just the Bulls are out of the picture. In '93, I'm assuming it's the Knicks and the Phoenix Suns. That should be one hell of a finals stylistically. A defensive-minded team against an offensive-minded team. Who wins in that scenario? I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Phoenix. I'm gonna go ahead and give it to Phoenix, but we don't know. We're just throwing out shit here. We don't really know. I think the back-to-back titles with the Rockets still happen. The Bulls don't exist in this scenario. 96, 97, 98. Does Shaq now stay? Does Shaq stay in Orlando without a Michael Jordan in the East? Because now, in the '96 playoffs, without the Bulls there, you could argue that in the Eastern Conference Finals, they play against an outmatched Knicks team, or without the Bulls being there, I'm trying to just think of that playoff series, playoff scenario. It's just hard to say. Whoever it is they play in the East, because someone has to replace the Bulls in the playoffs. But no matter how you look at it, I think whoever Orlando plays in the conference finals, they beat other than the Bulls. And then they go to the finals and play the Sonics. This time I think Orlando, don't get me wrong, I think the Sonics defense will give them a lot of problems. But I think Orlando doesn't make the same mistakes they made in '95. And they win a championship. So if they win a championship in this scenario, Shaq's only 24. Now Shaq may not be as willing to leave. It changes the landscape of the NBA. Is there a Magic dynasty? I don't know. I'm assuming in the same scenario, Penny still gets hurt. So then there's if Penny still gets hurt, Shaq goes on to regret re-signing with the Orlando Magic. He definitely doesn't stay for an extension in this particular situation. But 97, 98, maybe Karl Malone and John Stockton get a championship in '97. Let's just assume that the injuries to Penny hurt Orlando. Let's say Miami beats them 4-3 in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then they go on to lose to John Stockton and Karl Malone in the finals. In '98, let's assume that Utah plays the Pacers in the NBA Finals. Because on paper, they were better than the Bulls. It's just Michael Jordan was able, and Pippen, and Kukoc were able to make some clutch plays to beat them in that Game 7. But let's just say Utah, I think, beats them again in '98. They won a championship again in '98. So we look at Karl Malone and Stockton in totally different situations. 2-time NBA champions. Karl Malone, 2-time Finals MVP. Who wins the MVP awards now in the years that Michael won them? In '88, it was Jordan. Maybe it goes to Magic. So Magic has an additional MVP award. In '91 and '92, when Jordan won those back-to-back MVP awards, maybe because of the fact that many people thought Barkley should have won it in '90, maybe Barkley wins an MVP award in '91. I don't know. Maybe it does go to Clyde in '92. Then Barkley gets his third MVP in '93. In '96, if there's no Michael Jordan there, then I'm trying to think. I mean, who was the standout guy that year other than Mike? Shaq missed 20-something games that year. Penny had a great year. I don't think they would have given it to Dave Robinson again or Elijah Wan. That's a. Let me see something. I'm looking at the MVP voting in '96. Matter of fact, for that matter, let me look at the MVP voting in '91. I said Barkley. Remember, he also won the All-Star Game MVP that year. So actually, Magic was second that year. So I switched my point. I got to go with Magic. For some reason, I thought Charles was second MVP voting that year. But still, you can make the argument. Well, let me see something. Let me look at the 90. Let me look at the 90-91 Sixers. Did they fall off a lot? I know the Bulls beat them in the semis that year. How many games did they win? 44 and 38. Yeah, it's kind of low to get an MVP award. So maybe Magic does get it, because 44 wins is pretty low to get an MVP award. So that would be, in addition to the MVP award that now goes to Magic in '88, that's 5 MVP awards for Magic. So Magic's legacy gets better. Let's go to '96. So Dave Robinson was second MVP. So maybe Dave Robinson wins the second consecutive MVP award. Okay. Charles Barkley, Karl Malone in '97. Karl Malone in '98. So Karl Malone wins back-to-back MVP awards. So a lot of these guys, their legacies improve, and they win multiple championships. Dave Robinson, without Jordan, you could say he wins back-to-back league MVPs. Eventually, a championship, 2 championships with the Spurs with Tim Duncan. Karl Malone, back-to-back champions. Matter of fact, Karl Malone wins, when I think about it, back-to-back MVPs, because he wins them in '97, '98, and '99, right? 2 championships, 2 finals MVPs. So all these guys' resumes get better to the point where a lot of these dudes are they're looked upon as top 20 all-time players. All of them. All because Michael Jordan didn't play. So without Michael Jordan, these guys, they become top 10, 15 players, which makes the Jordan era look even better in hindsight. But then again, this is just a possibility. I'm not saying that this is what would have happened, but man, that's a very intriguing way of looking at it. But tell me what you guys think.